Welcome to Trulyfit, the online fitness marketplace connecting pros and clients through unique fitness business software.
Bobby, thanks so much for joining the Trulyfit Podcast. Why don't you give my listeners and the audience a background on who you are and what exactly you do in the health and fitness industry?
Yes, my name is Bobby Esbrandt. I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I've been practicing for 7 years now. I've built a practice. I'm the owner and co-owner and co-founder of Impact Sports Physical Therapy. We're based just outside of Baltimore, Maryland. We built a practice that is based on treating the athlete. So we're very niche based. I also work as the team physical therapist for Coppin State University, Howard University in Washington, D.C. And yeah.
Cool. I know the area. I went to school at West Virginia University, so I had a lot of friends from that area. And then I had buddies who played at Towson, used to be Towson State, now obviously it's Towson. So I've been down to that area. And I know that you're from Baltimore just because you say Baltimore. So if you replace the T with a D, we know that's where you're from.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, I grew up about an hour north of Baltimore City, so more up in Hicktown of up near the Pennsylvania line. But yeah.
Is that Carroll County?
Hartford, actually.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know much about that county, but okay. So I had you on because I heard you on other podcasts before. I really like your content, and I think you have a good understanding of training athletes, and that's really what this month is about. We're talking a lot about training athletes. So first, I guess walk me through your client experience. So if I'm a young athlete and I come to you, Bobby, what is the first step we take before we start working together?
I mean, it's been interesting because we've built, social media has been such a huge component of how we built our practice. And it's something I'm not like, it always takes people surprised when I say this, but I am not a big social media guy.
Yeah.
Like I anything personal, I don't have a personal Instagram. I'm never on Facebook. I don't do that stuff, but I did get a business Instagram, and it's the best thing I could have ever done. So a large part of my clientele, they hit me up on Instagram, and they hit me up. They say whatever issue they have. I collect all the information that I need from them, get that to my front desk, and then we get them going and we get them up and through here.
Cool. And then is the first step as they come through the door, are you doing some sort of analysis of all of their physical traits and their skill sets? Is it like do you have a list of things that you run down? Are you doing an FMS screen? How exactly do you go apart, like initially finding out what it is that is best for your athlete?
Yeah, I know. So that's where the majority of the clients I'm seeing, I do some training, but 99% of what I'm doing, it's some athlete who's coming in with whatever issue it might be, right? Whether they got knee pain, ankle pain, back pain, whatever it may be. So that's where my physical therapy training comes into play. And, we go through a full diagnosis of things, that could be looking at, their mobility, their strength, their stability, their movement patterns. You mentioned FMS, which I think is interesting because, that's something where, like, when I was coming up through school, I graduated from PT school in 2014. And that was kind of like the peak of where FMS was. It was that one study that was done where they found that it could predict injury risk, and man, we all know where that kind of turned from there. So no, I'm not an FMS guy. I'm not an SFMA guy. I don't really. I think those things are good for certain circumstances. I think if you lack some type of consistent way of how you screen patients and you want something basic, I think it can be good, but for me, at this point in my career, I kind of know when they come in within the first couple minutes of them talking, describing their issue, I have a pretty good idea of where that eval is going to take me, what their deficits are, and what I need to look at.
Yeah. And assuming you've seen all of these things before, right? So you're just playing off of past clients and obviously studies, but really anecdotal things that you've seen. I full disclosure here, my clientele is majority seniors. So I don't work with a lot of athletes. I work with seniors. So this is intriguing to me when I talk to people who work with athletes, because it's just something I've rarely done. I've worked with a few 17, 18, 19-year-olds who were training for, let's say, like high school football, but I've never worked with a high-level athlete before.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's definitely a different clientele. My first job out of PT school, it was, in your general, it was a small private practice, but it was a general run-of-the-mill. I kind of wanted to blow my brains out. God bless you for being able to do that. But the average age of my patients would be like 65, 68. And for me, that like you have those ones where it's incredibly rewarding from the physical therapy standpoint, where you're sitting there working with them, but there were so many where they didn't want to be there. They weren't a motivated clientele. And I didn't feel like I was being challenged in any way. I felt like I could give them basic things. And from you, where you're coming from more of the performance spectrum or the personal training spectrum, like I can see how that would be. They're coming there because they want to get better.
Yeah, they're coming there because they want to get better. And then also, I think the difference is when you're training younger athletes, at least for me, I get along better with the adults. So in an hour-long personal training session, there's a lot of conversation. You're shooting the shit. You're talking about the day. You're talking about their grandkids, the things going on. And it's hard for me to hold a conversation with a 16-year-old. So, but to each their own, and that's why they need people like you in the industry, and they need people like me. You need all types here. But I want to jump to the next question here. Why do you think that we see more injuries today, Bobby, than we have ever before? I mean, we're supposed to be better at injury prevention, and yet people like you and orthos seem to be booked up. Why is this?
I think there's a couple things. I mean, number one, I'm 34 years old, so I'm not that far removed. At least I'd like to think I'm not that far removed from when I was in college and I was in high school. But I think there's more awareness about a lot of these things to an extent. Like I remember back, like when I was playing, I didn't have a strength coach. I didn't have a gym that I went to go train in. I mean, every single one of these kids now, they have some gym that they're going and training at. They've got their own strength coaches. They have their performance coaches. It's a different world when it comes to that. So I think more awareness is one piece. I think COVID played a huge role in things as well. I definitely saw a huge uptick in the amount of Achilles tears, the amount of tendon-based issues, just because kids were sidelined for so long. All these tissues, they weren't stressed to the capacity they're used to, and then they were thrown out there and they just fell apart. Third thing, and this is something that people have been talking about for a long time, is just kids are playing sports for a much longer period of time now. There's not really off seasons anymore. I mean, there's a lot more specificity nowadays, and there's no breaks. So I think when you add that aspect into it, I mean, that's where we see a lot of these chronic type issues, and kids don't even know any better. Like I had a girl, my last patient I just wrapped up with here today, she's 14 years old, and she's in with me for a hamstring strain, but I mean, she's had knee pain for years, and I had to look at her. I was like, because she thought it was normal. I was like, you're 14. It's not normal. She's like, oh, it's not? It's like, no, it's not. So I think there's a lot of factors that play with it.
I think that was a really good point too. I never thought of that, how the sort of the landscape of of sports has changed. When I was doing these things, I'm only 2 years older than you. We played one sport each season, right? We were almost forced to. You played baseball, football, basketball, whatever, throw soccer in there. And then maybe you had some sort of off season where you were lifting, but now it's like they pick one sport and they're doing it day and night. And maybe somehow they're training on Saturday and Sunday for it. And they're seeing a specialist and a personal trainer, and then they're going to all these different people. So there's an uptick in that. And I also think there was a time where you didn't report injuries as much. So if you had what would be now considered a serious concussion, you and me, we didn't report those things. We just played through the concussions. And if you did have some sort of, let's say, ankle sprain or something, maybe you saw the athletic trainer and then you just took a few days rest and it got bumped down. You didn't really go the next level to see an orthopedic unless it was like spine related, if it was just exterior pain somewhere, wrist, ankle, elbow, joints, we just said, deal with it. And I think nowadays people are taking it more seriously, which is a good thing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
And I don't know how you feel about this, but do you feel like people are being overtrained? Is that a reason why? Not just the fact that they're training more, but that we're doing too much for these kids. Are you seeing like what you would consider like overuse injuries?
In some cases, yes. I mean, I think the other thing that I'm seeing is, there's a lot of great people out there doing different types of training, right? Because kids, they've got their skills coaches, they've got their strength coaches, they've got their PTs, right? They have their actual coaches. What I'm starting to see more of is like the skill coach now thinks he's a strength coach, right? And he'll start branching into stuff up and through there, and all vice versa across the map there. And when I see some of the things that kids are doing, like they're getting a lot of bad information. they're getting a lot of bad training when it comes to this stuff. And that's not every case, but there's enough of it where it's not good. And I can think of a lot of examples off the top of my head of situations where that's happened. But in terms of like when they're actually kind of honed in with just like one good trainer, like there's some really good strength coaches in this area. And I think they do a good job. I haven't had really any bad experiences with any strength coaches that are like, wow, you're getting really shitty training there. I don't feel like that's it. I think it's a combination of just no rest, just too much between everything. And then in those certain circumstances where people kind of just aren't staying in their lane.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. People, I think sometimes those lanes, it's hard to really draw a line in what does what too, right? If you're like, oh, I'm like a speed and agility coach. It's like, well, does that mean that I'm not allowed to lift weights?
Yeah.
You know, and if I'm a weightlifting coach, does that mean I'm not allowed to do speed and agility drills with my athletes? So I think where we come in as personal trainers, again, I've only worked with like high school athletes, but the athletes I have worked with, actually, I worked with a guy who was a 45-year-old triathlete for America, who was like representing like the triathlete games or something, right? Mm-hmm. So my focus with him a lot was working on things that he didn't work on, meaning he was always running and swimming and biking. So I had to look at those muscles he was already working on and then work the other things, wherein I think a lot of strength coaches focus on working the same things people are already working, but then they get overworked, if that makes sense. So if you're a triathlete, you're really only moving in sort of like sagittal plane, right? Mm-hmm. You're never doing anything rotational unless you consider running rotational. You're never really working in sort of frontal plane. So I always made sure to do those sorts of things and work on pulling muscles and the things they never do. And I think that's a problem with strength training coaches.
Yeah. And that's a good point. Cause I mean, that's something that I struggle with, especially because I mean, at least my brand of PT, like I have a huge bias towards loading individuals. And, you know, it's a criticism I get often is where like, oh, that's not physical therapy. You know, that's strength and conditioning. Well, you know what? Good physical therapy should look like strength and conditioning, but it is hard for me, like when I have in certain circumstances when I have to tag team with a strength coach, because there is so much overlap. And like you don't want to double dip into someone, you don't want to overdo it with someone, and it is a hard line to kind of walk sometimes.
You seem to use a lot of band related things in your practices. Is that because you learned under someone who did that? Do you just the principles of using them work better, or does it just look better on IG? Why do you use bands?
I do. I didn't learn anyone with them. I love the variability that they can give, like the amount of uses that I can have. I mean, you can use them to provide resistance. You can use them to provide accommodating resistance. So for me, like when I'm rehabbing someone and I want to simulate speed and I don't want to cover a huge area, like I can get a lot of really great decel work out of those things. And that's what I love so much about them is them to be able to provide that piece, because I think that's an aspect where it's getting a lot more love nowadays. But I think 3, 4, 5 years ago, like there wasn't much emphasis on decel training and the importance of that in the rehab process. So yeah, I mean, I love their use for that stuff.
Are there, I guess you would call it injury prevention exercises that you use or that you give to clients? Or do you just think injury prevention just comes down to assessing someone's body, and if they're not mobile enough in certain areas, work on mobility? If they're not strong enough, use strength. Is it just individual assessments?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I do with most of my clients, because I mean, they're generally coming into me for some type of issue. So like, I know, like a lot of my pro clientele, like, you know, like say some of them have like just chronically, they have some type of hamstring issue, right? So I mean, I'll sit there and be like, all right, listen, when you check into the facility, these are your 4 things. You run through these things before practice. These are things that are going to help prep you, warm you up and through that. So I try to individualize it with that. I know there's been some decent studies on certain injury, you know, prevention programs with, you know, soccer and baseball. And I think those are good, but there's just so much variability between individuals where one person's strength doesn't mean it's another's, and one person's deficiency doesn't mean it's another one. So I think it's hard to give a blanket one, but I think when you're dealing with like mass groups, such as like a club soccer setting, I think they can be good. I haven't really gotten involved with that aspect of things. But yeah.
So you talked about load before, and you said you were catching some slack. I guess people said you use a lot of it for a physical therapist. As far as
Yeah.
like weight is concerned, this is a question I always ask a lot of people. Again, not my expertise. When you're working with athletes, there seems to be, and this might be a leading question, at some point there needs to be a diminishing returns to how much weight you're using, right? So like, why am I having a wide receiver squat 600 pounds? And if that's not the type of exercise that he's going to be using, he's an explosive athlete. He never has to come up slow with a lot of weight. Like where does this line of diminishing returns start? And again, do you train positions differently, or I should say train? Do you work with positions differently? People who come in with injuries, but one person is a wide receiver as opposed to a lineman. Are you working with them differently?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a really good question. It's something that I think you almost have to have a feel for. Like I do see, and there is value with lifting heavy weights for a number of different reasons. Number one, strength is paramount, right? I mean, if we talk about injury prevention, when we sit there and we talk about what things are most beneficial in reducing injury risk, strength is far and away the best. Everyone comes in and says, oh, I got hurt because I didn't stretch. It's like, no, stretching doesn't do diddly squat. So from that, I mean, the stronger you can make your tissue, it's not even just the muscle. So obviously, like, you're going to get stronger. It's going to make your tissues more resilient. It's going to make everything from your ligaments to your tendons to your bones, like everything becomes stronger. So the stronger your tissues are, the higher that threshold of failure is, right? So I mean, strength is important, but to your point, right, from a performance spectrum, that's where, like, is a wide out squatting 500 pounds ass to grass really necessary? Well, probably not. I mean, if we sit there and we look at what the research shows us, like, there's other things that will help make that athlete more explosive. So I think the heavy lifting has its place, and you have to know, right, what are the benefits I'm getting out of this? But is more weight equal more power, more high jump? No, not always. There is that line, like you talked about, where, all right, we got as much out of this as what we can. And that's where we have to use those other training methods to sit there and get what we want from the other aspect.
Yeah, that's well put. And I think, to add to that, Bobby, there's only so much time you can work with an athlete, or how much time that they have, right? So if you have a wide receiver coming in and he's whatever post ankle injury and he's lifting and he's asking you questions, hey, Bobby, what should I do in this, let's say 90-minute window I have each day to work out? If you're filling it with something, that means you're taking something else out, right? So it's not always, is this good? To me, all exercise is good. All strength is good, but what's better? What's best?
Yep.
I think that's a question that people don't ask.
Now, I think that's where you sit there, and that's where your analysis comes in and your assessment comes in, is, all right, what is this individual's greatest deficiency, right? So I mean, if this dude's squatting, if he's, college male and he can only squat 1 times his body weight, all right, that's a pretty big issue. But, if that dude's sitting there and he can squat, 2 or 2.5 times his body weight, okay, you know what? That's probably not our issue right up and through here. So that's where that assessment piece comes in. That's where knowing what you're looking for and how you want to progress things comes in, because strength is one piece to the puzzle. It's not the single holy grail.
Are there injuries that you're seeing more of now than you were surprised by? Like, do you have more? I know you just talked about Achilles, but
yeah,
are there injuries that are coming in more now? And now doesn't have to be post-COVID, just like before you even became a physical therapist, right? Like while you were in school and going through the process, are you surprised by a certain type of injury?
I wouldn't say that anything.
And what are the ratios of your injury? Just like ballpark, like, are you seeing like knee surgeries compared to like ankle sprains? Like, what are you seeing the most of?
I see it all, man. I see it all lately, and that's where it's hard. Because I mean, like, I am in a bit of a unique situation because my entire caseload is athletes.
Yeah.
From the morning when I check in to the time that I leave, every single person that walks in here, they're a high level athlete. So I mean, I see everything. I wouldn't say that it leans towards any one thing. I mean, I see a lot of ACLs. I see a lot of hamstring strains. I see a lot of shoulder labrums, hip labrums, foot and ankle stuff. I don't get a whole lot of elbow. The wrist, I just would rather not be bothered with. It's not very fun to work with.
Can you talk about hamstring strains a little bit? This is something that trainers, again, we're, as far as our learning understanding, my anecdotal understanding might be different. My wife's a sports medicine doctor, and I've had hamstring issues myself. So I've gone down the rabbit hole, but trainers, we don't learn about those sorts of things. All we learn is grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. we know it's grade 3 if there's, let's say, a rupture and there's bleeding. But as far as like the rehab or when to start or when to finish, we know nothing about that. So how do you deal with hamstring strains?
So hamstring strains, I want to get them in ASAP. I think no matter what soft tissue injury we're talking about, like the sooner you start, generally the quicker your return is going to be. So hamstrings are one, again, my bias towards loading. Hamstrings, like I'm trying to figure out, all right, what type of load can they handle that first day, right? Like that's part of my assessment. All right, how bad is this strain? Where are they at? And if you think about like what the simplest possible loading of that hamstring might be, I literally it's always the first exercise I go to with everyone I see. I have them lay in supine. Their feet are elevated up on a box, straight leg. Can you bridge up on 2? Can you take away 1? And can you eccentrically lower down on the 1 leg? And I just want to see what their tolerance is to hamstring loading with that hip and that knee completely locked out. From there, that gives me a piece of information, right? Whichever way it goes, I go to the next thing. Next thing, I have them again laying on their back, have their knees bent up. They come up into a bridge, and I want to see, all right, how far can they walk their heels out? I want to see what type of eccentric loading can they tolerate. Like, right, what range can we get that? Because when we talk about a hamstring strain, right, obviously it happens because that tissue endured some type of high velocity eccentric force that the hamstring wasn't prepped ready to go, right? It's always typically some type of sprinting mechanism. So our very first goal needs to be restoring your ability to load your hamstring at lengthened states. If you can show me you can start tolerating load at those things, I can build strength then in those ranges. And then once I have strength, then I start working on trying to build your tissue's tolerance to high speed contractions at those ranges. And I think that last piece is something that is so overlooked when it comes to hamstrings. And hamstrings, to me, like I love working with hamstrings because I think they're one of the most botched rehabs that I see time and time again. Because generally I'll have kids come in where they've had just 3-4 recurrent strains of the same thing. And all right, what'd you do for it? Well, I stretched it. Okay, how'd stretching feel? Oh, it hurt. Well, no shit. All right, I iced it, I rested it, and then I started running. Okay, what did we do to build this tissue back? And that's always that missing link.
Yeah, and I think the problem is why it's difficult for people who don't have the education or don't work with people is that it's so finicky where you can do one false movement and maybe your client said, hey, I thought I was like 50-60% healed and I did one thing and now I'm back to square one. And trainers are afraid of that, right? We're afraid to like re-injure them. And I think that's a problem. What do you do if you're doing, let's say, this bridge test and the second they go up, even with 2 legs, they feel something and they're like, can't do this. Do you just have them rest for a week? Do you have them come back or do you still give them exercises to do?
No, I'll do it because I can find some type of loading of what I can do. And if even it's not me hitting that hamstring directly, like by trying to hit it directly, I can get it through doing some type of glute exercise that's a little bit more glute dominant, or I can get it through. There's so many other means what I can do it, but I have to find whatever way I can to load that tissue. And then I use some of the other means, me as being a physical therapist, stuff that I can do to try to get down some of that pain, right? So dry needling, and whatever other type of tissue work we might want to do. Those are things I generally try to throw at that first day as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's good to know because I think the consensus, at least in the personal training industry, is like, if there's a hamstring injury, to stay away from it, to tell your client not to do anything. And that's just because I think it really is, it's not a science thing. It's just that everyone's afraid that they're going to re-injure their client. And a lot of times too, it seems like grade 1, that you don't send them up the ladder, meaning from a personal trainer to a physical therapist. But I think it probably needs to be sent up the ladder because it's just above our pay grade.
Yeah, no, I think any type of those little strains are something that need to be seen, because like I said, I mean, even us, like think back in the day, even something as simple as an ankle sprain, right? You played, all right, well, sprained my ankle. All right, it'll be better in a week. No big deal. I mean, what we find now from a research perspective is that it becomes so much more. An ankle sprain is so much more than just the ankle sprain, right? I mean, after an ankle sprain, obviously the ligaments are stretched out and your ankle becomes a little bit more unstable, right? But I mean, you'll see a compensation from the joint itself where it'll lock up. So you'll have less ankle mobility up on that side. There's actually a decrease in neural input from the glutes on that affected side. So you have decreased hip strength on that side. And you can just imagine just from those two things, the cascade of things that you basically open up that limb to with things that could be easily be addressed. And that's where kind of alluding back to what we talked about before. I think there's more awareness of things nowadays than there was before, because I mean, yeah, like you said, we'd sit there, you see the athletic trainer, they tape it up. Okay, we're back out there.
Yeah.
And sometimes you still have to do that, but you need to address it behind closed doors.
And I always harp on this with young personal trainers I mentor. That's why it's so important when you sit down with clients, you're doing that initial consultation, to not just get a piece of paper where they're writing out their past injuries because they forget to write things, or
Yeah.
they think things that are important are important. So they might be like, oh, I got stitches in my leg, but they don't tell me about their ankle sprain. I'm like, well, the ankle sprain is more important because now there's been compensations for the last 6 years. I don't care about your stitches. So you have to actually have a conversation with them and sort of needle them to give you every single thing. I was telling somebody on a past podcast, I was working with someone for a year, and inside of that year, they had mentioned like briefly in casual conversation that they had a heart attack 4 years ago. I'm like, you never wrote that on your health history form. So people just don't tell you.
No, I'm laughing because I mean, it happens time and time again. I mean, just last week I had a girl who came in for an eval, and she's high level basketball player, right? She's going to be playing at Louisville next year.
Wow.
And she's got knee pain, right? There's just this knee pain. And she'll be, yeah, you know, it just hurts. I just have this pain here. I'm like, okay. So I'm doing my little assessment. All right, nothing looks like grossly off. And, you know, the next session she comes in and she's like, and we were just like talking. She's like, yeah, you know, my kneecap has popped out 5 times on this side. I was like, what? I was like, I could have been told that. And it's just time and time again, you'll get those types of things. But yeah, I mean, people are funny.
Yeah. And I think it's just like a human nature thing. We have this, like, we have the amnesia to forget and think that the things happen to us aren't big deals. Like someone was talking about surgery to me the other day, and I was like, oh, I never had surgery. I had surgery twice. I just totally like forgot that I had surgery because like neither of them were that big of deals. But that's why you have to probe your clients and don't believe. It's not like they're trying to pull one over on you. They just forget. So
yes, exactly.
Staying on topic with the load, it seems like the general public is so into Olympic lifting now. Do you see that with your clients? I understand that you're not necessarily training them, but are they coming in and when you talk to them and their strength coaches and working with them, is everybody sort of just in the Olympic lifting mode?
And it depends on the strength coach. So like before I started Impact, I had a job up in Baltimore City and worked with a lot of CrossFit athletes up there. And so like, obviously like I learned the lingo, you know, I know what's done with them, but like from a sport perspective, I have a hard time justifying doing it with the adolescent athlete or even the college athlete. Number one, it's so damn hard to teach how to do some of those movements. Number two, you think about some of the requisites that are needed to do those movements successfully. And so to your point, what you talked about earlier, right? The amount of like, I have this much time with you. How can I maximize my time with this patient? I don't see it with Oli lifting. And I've seen it with some of the places I've been in the past where strength coaches have been, some of the colleges I've been with and worked with, strength coaches have been biased towards that. But I mean, we've got dudes that, you know, might have 160 degrees of shoulder flexion and they're snatching. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And then if you sit there and you look, like, I think Olympic lifting is good. And look, I mean, listen, to me, there's not a more badass lift on the planet than a good looking snatch. Like that's impressive. And I wish I could do one thing, it'd be a good snatch. But I mean, from a performance standpoint, they're good, but I don't know that they provide that much more benefit than squatting, deadlifting, and the basics. Yeah. And there's been some studies that have been done that actually support that.
Yeah, I think you make a great point with the time thing that we talked about before. And it's sort of a two-part also, the difficulty of the lift. If you don't have a coach there all the time watching you, you can do more harm than good during a lot of these movements. And then also you see people who try to like perfect these movements. So now I'm an expert exerciser instead of expert at my sports. So this is a performance thing. And I have to spend 45 minutes on my clean and my snatch because you will, in order to, you know, you have to start light and work your way up and work on the form, and you need the repetitions to build the, you know, neuromuscular activity, and you have the neurons going and all these things. So I think there are better ways to spend your time in a strength capacity than doing these movements. I'm not against them. Again, I think people are so like one-sided with fitness. They pick one thing out, they love it, they're obsessed with it. All exercise is good. And if that's what you love to do, go for it. I'm not telling you not to do it. I just think from a performance perspective, I think we're going to see a change in the landscape. I think, and this leads to my next question, you have, I get it, it's a different position than being a defensive tackle, let's say, but Tom Brady and your Drew Breeses, who are more about mobility and more about using bands and more about nutrition and sleep and body weight and less about just hitting the Olympic lifts. Do you think things are moving towards there? Do you do a lot of that stuff? I know you use bands, but are you using like TRX, and are you using like other forms of like mobility and sort of, I would say, like rotational training?
I use those things, and that's where I think like all of those things have their place, right? I think anytime you're sitting there and you're programming for somebody, you've got to hit things from all angles, right? I mean, obviously Brady and Breeze, they're not the most athletic species on the planet, right? So I mean, their training is going to look a little bit different to begin with. The same way, like if you take a pitcher in baseball, right? His training is going to look vastly different than,
a catcher.
Yeah, or an athletic outfielder, right? Yeah. I mean, there's different things that they need, and that's where like any type of like throwing athlete, I kind of like, they're a whole different beast. All right, like there's something completely different. But I do still think, I mean, there are other people that think they could sit there and just do pure body weight stuff or little banded glute exercise and think that's going to get them. That stuff will get you. They have their place. If you're going to be a high level athlete, you need so much more than that stuff. Obviously the sleep, the nutrition, those are huge pieces. But in terms of training, like you got to be strong. You got to be able to produce force. You have to be able to absorb force, and you have to move well.
Yeah. And, I like your points. It seems like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you believe that strength is the most important thing, and that there are other places for, let's say, small muscle training and mobility and stretching and those sorts of things. But they're secondary to strength, or they need to be coupled with strength. And this is not my expertise, but in my clients who've had, let's say, like SI joint issues, and my older clients who have like pelvic issues, it's almost always strength that fixes it. Stretching makes them feel better. It relieves pain for a short period of time. But in order for us to fix the problem, it's because things are moving around. It's not because they're too tight in certain areas. Or if they are too tight, it's because there's been compensations and there's protection of the certain injury because there's weaknesses everywhere. And we have to wake those muscles up and build them up.
And I think that tightness piece is big. And I find myself, pretty much giving this speech to a patient almost every day, because every patient still thinks, it's always the hip flexor too, right? My hip flexors are tight, you have a good stretch for it. And I was like, all right, how long you been going on for? 2-3 years. It's like, okay. How often you stretch it? Every day. I was like, does it feel different from Monday to Tuesday? No, it wakes up and still it's just as tight. It's like, so not every tissue that is tight has to be stretched. And that's where like, and everyone's dumbfounded when I say that stuff, because like we're always taught growing up, stretching, that'll keep you from getting hurt. You just got to be mobile. But, just because the tissue's tight doesn't needs to be stretched. Tightness can actually be, and you were alluding to this just there a second ago, it can actually be a protective mechanism from your body, right? If your body sits there and it senses that your tissue is going to work into a range that it feels like it doesn't have the strength for, what's it going to do? It's not going to let it go there. Your body's very smart. Your body's not going to put you in a position to fail or get hurt, or at least do its best not to. It's going to tighten that thing up, be like, no, you're not going up and through there. Then the second you sit there and you load these structures, all of a sudden you sit there and you feel much more mobile. You feel better. So I do think, listen, if you're weak, I don't care what it is. If you are weak, that tissue is vulnerable. You are vulnerable.
I don't know a lot about non-contact injuries. I know that I see them all the time. I know that typically when we're watching sports and we see them, it seems to be ACL. Is there more of a genetic component to this? Is this a product of bad exercise regimens? Are people, let's say, imbalanced in one area? Why are these non-contact injuries happening?
So, I think it's number one, it's important to point out that you can do absolutely everything right, and non-contact injuries, they'll still be there. They're still going to happen. With that said, when we look at ACLs, for instance, right? Because that's the big non-contact one. No one ever is going to tear an ACL when they're trying to speed up. Okay. You're not going to tear your ACL when you're sitting there and you're generating some type of force. It's always with some type of deceleration movement. Okay. So across the board, I think what I've seen, an athlete can be incredibly fast. He can be incredibly strong. He can be incredibly explosive. Those things don't mean that he moves well. It doesn't mean that he controls his body well. And that's when we talked about, a little while ago about making sure we're hitting every facet when we're programming. And those are those pieces that I think get so overlooked. And it's for a couple of reasons, right? I mean, if you look at the collegiate setting, how long does a strength coach have with his guys in the weight room, right? He only has so long.
Yeah.
And so much of the emphasis is just put on bigger, faster, stronger. And, to their credit, a lot of it should be put on that. But I think a lot of the other things get overlooked. And even if they're made aware of them, there's just not the time to put in to try to address those things.
Yeah, that's interesting with the deceleration. I never thought of it that way, but you're right. I mean, that's where we see those injuries in the deceleration portion, especially with something like a wide receiver who might be running some sort of, comeback pattern or a dig. And, he takes a false step when he's about to make that cut, and then you see him go out. But, again, this is anecdotal. This is just from me watching. I have no data here. It does seem like a lot of times it's these wide receivers who look like baby deer, who are super fast, but only running straight, and their legs are a little, small and skinny, and they're not, they're not Tyreek Hill. They're not quick steppers. They're long striders, and maybe there's something to that. But is there? I've heard in the past that females are more likely to have ACL injuries because of how they're built. Is that from like the angle of the hips down to the knee, or is there some other structural reason?
So, females are more at risk to an ACL. There's still so much about ACL that's just not known. So, that angle you were talking about, it's called the Q angle, where it's basically looking at from the front of your hip bone to the front of your knee to your ankle. And it was widely assumed and believed that is a risk factor. Study after study that's come out recently shows plays no role in it.
Wow.
There's some thought that, menstrual cycles play a role. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. There's just so much we don't know. And a lot of stuff that we feel like we did know, now we're finding out we don't know. Hop testing and return to sport testing has always been a huge part of returning to sport and looking at that stuff. Now we're finding out that just because we sit there and, they can triple hop and show good symmetry, they pass all these hop tests that shows good symmetry. Athletes are very good compensators, and studies that come out even just this past year, which sits and shows that on that injured ACL leg, the individual actually offset work onto their ankle and onto their hip to achieve much of that distance. So they can still have quad deficits and mask them with these tests. So to be honest, there's a lot we still got to know. And that's where, at least for me, it's where I'm trying to add in other things that'll help give me a better idea. So, I've always been the guy, all right, after an ACL surgery, all right, it's at least 9 months of rehab, right? You're not coming back to play sport before 9 months. That's kind of that magic marker. All right, you've got to pass all these strength tests. All right, you got to pass your hop tests. You have to be within age and sport norms for those things. Pass your agility tests. And look, you look at the re-rupture rate is 20 to 25% for ACLs. Very high. There's a lot of things that go into that. One is not all PT places are kind of built like the way mine is, right? You look at a standard PT clinic, they might have, a pair of 25-pound dumbbells, a 12-inch box to hop on, and it sounds bad, but that's what it is. When that individual can sit there and, they can squat without pain, they can jog, they can jump. Okay, you're cleared, you're ready. So some don't even go through that testing process, but even the testing process, it's been shown that it's flawed. There were the things I just said. And so I started getting into force plates and utilizing those within the last couple months. And they give us another piece of information that even for myself, it's been lacking with my clients. And I think that's something that you see anytime with medicine or with sports performance stuff. Like, there's so much we know, but there's so much we don't know. And even stuff that we thought we knew, like it's changed over the last few years. And we should always be evolving.
Can you talk about those force plates? How exactly do you use them? What were they used for originally? Are you using them for the cause that they're supposed to be used for, or are you using them differently?
Yeah. So, I mean, the force plates that I have, they're through Valve, and I like them because they're dual force plates, right? So we've got two of them. So they give me a ton of data on everything under the sun, right? So, I mean, so if we just talk about like a counter movement jump, right? If I have someone do a CMJ on there, it'll show me obviously how high they jump, what their RSI is, all those performance metrics of how much eccentric force they produce and concentric force. But they'll also sit there and they'll show me, all right, how much force are they putting through one versus the other? What's that asymmetry? How much force are they landing with one versus the other? And then I can do everything under the sun with them. I can do single leg CMJ, like I can do landing tests. And so it allows me, anytime I'm sitting there, and if I can test a vertical power component versus horizontal hop testing, I'm going to get a better measure of, all right, what is this quad actually able to do? And I can get a quantitative number behind that. And so if I know that they're deficient in X, okay, 4 weeks, I want to train this. 4 weeks later, did my training make the difference that I was trying to make?
Wow.
So it's something that I've been really excited to use over the last few months. It's something I continue to be excited to use. And I do think that's where our field of physical therapy has to move. There has to be more of a quantitative approach behind what we're doing, because the standard, oh, you've got 4 out of 5, hip strength, like that's so subjective, and it doesn't tell us anything that we really need to know.
Yeah. And you would think that physical therapy, more so than even, obviously definitely more so than personal training, needs to be objective and not subjective, and have these numbers, these measurable numbers. Now, sometimes it's, if you don't have the equipment, you don't have the equipment, but that means you need to go to people who have the equipment, because it's important that you, as the person being, worked on, are being let go and meeting certain criteria and data that isn't just subjective. That if you went to Bobby as opposed to Jim down the street, Jim says, okay, you met 3 of these 5, and Bobby says you met 5 of the 5. So how do we really know unless we have these numbers? And, just going back to speak a little bit about, the sort of injuries we were talking about, us as personal trainers, I always tell my personal trainers, we're not physical therapists. We're not anatomical sleuths. Even if you're a corrective exercise specialist with IM, it's so impossible for me to tell you if your knee injury came from issues with your hip or issues with your ankle or issues with your knee, right? It's like, was there some sort of compensation going on that caused the knee injury because of the hip, or did the foot issue cause the knee injury, which caused the hip issue? If your whole left side is jacked up, I don't know where it started, but what I'm going to do is strengthen everything. I'm going to stretch everything. I'm going to work on everything, and then hope that, we heal up that way. And then I send you off to a physical therapist, someone like Bobby, who can pinpoint better where the injury potentially came from, because that's above our pay grade.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, speaking to what you do on a day-to-day basis, Bobby, when you're working with these athletes, I know you're a physical therapist by trade, but you have other certifications and degrees, and you work in more of a, almost a sports performance, realm. When you're working with athletes who are ready to be released, do they say, hey, we want to continue to work with you, we really like what you're doing, we want to work with you on a one-on-one basis? Or do you send them to someone you trust?
It depends on the athlete, number one. Like some, I sit there and I will for some. Like there's been many over the last few months who have expressed desire to do so. And that's the thing with being a physical therapist, is you develop such a bond. And this as a personal trainer even too, like you have that one-on-one time with a patient, you're sit there and you're seeing them multiple days a week. Like you develop relationships with these people. And then, you want to help them any way that you want. And when they sit there and they tell you, hey, we want to continue with you, even when we're done, you just let us know what the price is, we're going to do it. And I'm not going to turn that away. Now the ones that sit there and they drive, a fair distance to get to me, and then, we're not right around the corner, and yeah, I'm gonna sit there and be like, hey, it'd be really good for you if you get with so-and-so. So it's a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's always good to have clients who you want to continue to work with, but it's also good to network in the industry and have people downstream and upstream of you. We talk about this all the time on the podcast. Again, a lot of the listeners are, young personal trainers. It's good as a personal trainer to know somebody like a Bobby local in your area, and to know a sports medicine doctor, and to know whatever, a neurologist, and then to know a nutritional counselor or a registered dietitian, and be able to send your clients to the specialist, because ultimately your client is going to appreciate you more than you sending them off to somebody and actually having them do a good job and helping them heal and getting them to the right place than you pretending you know everything in every area, right? Bobby's not going to sit down and be like, I'm writing out a diet plan for all of my clients. Why? Because Bobby's so good at what he does, he's busy during the day doing what he does best. So he doesn't need to have his hand in everyone else's pockets, so to speak. So I think it's important. I say it almost every podcast, but to reiterate, you have to network in the industry and you have to stick to what you're good at.
And I think that's the thing. I mean, when you sit there and when you have those people, right? If you know a good ortho, if you know a good dietitian, if you know a good personal trainer, a good strength coach, like it ends up making you look better to the patients. Like, wow, this dude really put me in. This guy, wow, this is good. And they feel like they're more well taken care of in that respect.
Totally.
Yeah, like it's definitely important.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing but positives. There's no negative to sending somebody away. They're always going to come back to you. Mm-hmm. Bobby, this was great information. I really appreciate your time. Let the listeners know where they can find more about you and Impact.
Yeah, so again, my name is Bobby Esbrandt. I'm a co-owner of Impact Sports Physical Therapy. We're located just outside of Baltimore, Maryland. You can find us on Instagram at Impact Sports PT or my own Bobby Sports PT.
My guest today has been Dr. Bobby. Thank you for your time.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.